Hi everybody, welcome to our virtual book discussion on Facebook. Thanks for joining us. I'm Irene, I'm with the library, I'm a program coordinator, and today I have Dean with me.
Hi, I'm a former English teacher and currently working in the library and also doing my own writings.
So we're really excited. We read a really cool book. It's called The Still Life by Sarah Winman. And we have a lot to talk about in this book. She's a British author. We can go ahead and take a look at her. She's written a couple different books. This is probably, this is her most recent book. It hasn't been out that long. I think she wrote it last year. I think it was in 2022 was when this book came out. So it's only about a year old. It's been on the popular lists for Good Morning America, some of the New York bestselling. So people have kind of looked at this book and said it's worth reading. So Dean and I said, let's give it a shot. Let's see if we like it. So the first thing I want to ask you, Dean, about the book is just your overall impression of it, rating it as a 1 to 5, 5 being that it's an exceptional book, being the best. What would you give this book?
Okay, I'm going to basically steal some of your thunder because we agreed. The opening of the book is slow, and I kept reading it thinking, I don't know where this is going, so I was going to give it a 2 out of 5. The only reason I kept going is because I was the one that recommended it, because a patron in the library recommended it to me. Once you get about halfway in, there's a character named Evelyn. The main character is a man named Ulysses, who's a former soldier for the Brits during World War II, and he meets this art specialist named Evelyn. They meet briefly at the beginning of the novel. She disappears, but she shows up about halfway in, and they keep missing each other. They're trying to reconnect, and that's when the intrigue starts to really kick in. But it's about 250 pages in, so you have to gut it out. At that point, it started to be a 4, but I wasn't sure exactly how it was going to pan out. And toward the end, the last section is Evelyn's backstory. And once I started reading that, I started getting at what I think the author was getting at and understanding and piecing it together. And as an English teacher, I'd give it a 5 because I thought it was very cool. It was just basically literary analysis is playing a game of riddles, and it's finding the riddles and being able to solve them. That's what you have to do in this.
I think we were very close. Like the very beginning of the book was very dry. It was just a bunch of characters, and they were just doing very mundane things like regular life. And you're kind of like, where is this going, and what's the point of this book, and where are we going? And there was no intrigue, there was no major plot definition going on. It was really mostly character development, which you later will really like because you do fall in love with characters in this book. Overall, I would give it a 4. I wouldn't give it a 5, but I would give it a 4 as a read. But like Dean said, struggle with it, go through it, and get through the 200 pages. It's definitely probably worth a read at the end. We're going to go on to question 2. Dean, tell me your impressions of the following characters in the novel. We'll start with Ulysses.
Thumbs up, good guy. He's the protagonist and is probably the most balanced of the characters. Not quite as quirky, but he's the mainstay that everybody else is drawn to.
Absolutely. And then we have Peg.
Peg is the love of his life, and she's a floozy. And she makes herself available to lots of people.
And she was later on his ex-wife, but throughout the novel, they're together over and over and over again. Like, they can't be separated. And he actually becomes the father to a child that is not his through Peg, and pretty much becomes the husband in the relationship, even though they are divorced. And then we have Cressy, who is one of my favorite characters in the book. He's he's an older, he's probably 25 years to Ulysses Sr., and he's kind of like the curmudgeon. He's a little eccentric. He has this parrot that speaks Shakespeare, so he's kind of strange. And he loves to talk to trees, which I never quite got that part of the novel and why we have it in there, but he's different.
I didn't know where to put Cressy either, but one of the things I realized, there's a nature motif in here, and the motif is a pattern that keeps showing up. And Cressy is somehow bonded with that. He's almost a foil for nature. Hence the bird. By the way, the parrot is a colorful bird, yes, as opposed to a black and white photograph. We'll talk about that later if we get a chance. But he definitely is quirky, but when you have something like that in a novel, there's a reason why. You got to figure out why it's in there.
Yeah, why is he? And then you have Cole. We disagreed on whether or not he was Cole or Colonel. I thought it was Colonel. It's probably my military background. You thought it was Cole, but we'll go with Cole.
Okay.
And he was the man that owned the pub. And so in the very beginning of the story, for the first 200 pages, they're all hanging out in the pub doing stuff.
Right.
And it's his pub. It's the Stout and Parrot, right?
Right.
Stout and
Stoughton
Parrot. And he's kind of like another curmudgeon like Cressy. You know, he has a daughter, though. You see that special side of him. He does have a daughter that is, you would think of now as emotionally challenged. In the book, she's slow. Her name's Ginny. Mm-hmm. And so you see the fatherly love come out of him. So there are different pieces of him that aren't beyond quirky.
And Pete is your next character. He's a piano player in a pub, but he ends up following Ulysses, as well as all the other characters, to Florence, Italy, where the rest of the novel takes place. And the last character,
Claude the Parrot.
Yes.
He's probably the funniest character in the book. He's great that he's in there, but you wonder where did he come from and what is his purpose. But he's definitely a parrot that comes in at interesting times and quotes Shakespeare.
Okay.
So those are our main The one that resonated the most with me, I think, was Ulysses. I think his parental love for his daughter that wasn't his daughter meant a lot to me. I'm married to a husband that loves children that are not biologically his, and I can feel that bond in this book, and it really spoke to me in those terms. So I think Ulysses is in that characterization of him is what really resonated with me personally.
The character who resonated most with me is the one that's not listed here, is Alice, A-L-Y-S, and she is the Peg's daughter, and the young woman that Ulysses ends up raising as his own, and she's got a lot of spunk and is, I think, a very colorful and very deep character.
Yes, she was definitely brought a lot to the book.
Yes, she did.
All right, question 3. Still Life opens with a fateful meeting between Ulysses and Evelyn. You kind of spoke to this at the very beginning. How does this encounter shape the rest of their lives? What did they each take away from that evening?
I'm not exactly sure how to answer that, but I need to add that it was one of those events that I kind of read through it that, okay, so what? But Evelyn shows up, as I said earlier, about halfway through the novel, and they reconnect. And Evelyn, I think, is the key to understanding what the author is trying to say in this novel. And I'll share that with you in a little bit. I don't want to share it right now.
I think it shapes the rest of their lives because, first off, it was a very traumatic night. And they were there with Darnley, which was also the other gentleman who was there when they met for the first time. And he ends up dying during the war.
Yes.
And he doesn't make it. And so I think it was a very conflict-ridden time when they were there in the middle. I mean, basically they were in a basement and there was the ravages of war, guns going off, everything happening. And Evelyn is sitting there basically telling him about art and how important art is. And she basically is a historian, and she's there to make sure that all this stuff during the war doesn't get ruined.
And she keeps pointing out the beauty of life and the beauty of art, which is in contrast to this is at the tail end of World War II when the Nazis were retreating from Italy. And so you have all this devastation left behind, but these pieces of art that people have stashed away and tried to protect that she is actually coming to help find. And so it's that contrast between the devastation that men can do to each other versus the beauty that men are very capable of encapsulating.
Absolutely. And so what did they take away from the evening? I think they both went through something very traumatic and very strong with emotion, and they walked away from it wanting to be part of each other's lives. And they didn't get to do that till the end of the novel.
Right.
You can read number 4.
Do you think Evelyn and Ulysses meeting and then their near misses for decades are due to sheer coincidence, or do they feel more like matters of fate? I would say that's yes to both of them. I think fate and mere coincidence sort of go hand in hand. But this is where the novel really picks up, and it's halfway in, where Evelyn travels back to Florence, not knowing that Ulysses has moved there. He moved from England to Florence. We didn't explain how he ended up there.
Right.
He just very quickly, he saved a man's life from falling off of a rooftop, and and that man always remembered Ulysses at the end of the war, and when he died, he left his apartment or his house to Ulysses.
Right.
Ulysses didn't know what to do with it, so he ended up moving to Florence. Because of Evelyn's love of art and her love of Florence, they end up reconnecting there, but they keep missing each other, like on the same street and opposite sides, and they pass, don't realize that the other one's there.
Or he'll be just coming to the train station and she'll be just leaving the train
Right.
station. You know,
Right.
it's like one of those near misses multiple times in the book, and it's very obvious that they're supposed to connect at some
Right,
point.
and that's what helps bring the tension back into the novel.
Absolutely. Question number 5. Love, in all its forms, is a major theme in still life. Discuss the types of love explored in the novel. How do we see examples of familial, romantic, platonic, and unconditional love in this novel?
Well, the unconditional love is seen in Peg and Ulysses, especially.
Yes.
Because even though she is unfaithful, and I think you didn't like Peg because of that. She was kind of a floozy, but I think there's some depth to Peg, and she's like all the women in the novel, is trying to find fulfillment and reach out for something that you just can't pinpoint.
Can't find. She falls in love with an American and has this baby, and she never recovers because that was the person that she truly fell in love with.
And so she ends up marrying a gentleman named Ted, who's who's abusive.
Yes, he's
and
terrible.
not a good guy. And all the time, her original husband Ulysses he has always loved Peg, and I guess it's been faithful to her, even though they're actually divorced. I think he's still hoping that they will eventually be able to reconnect or rebuild that relationship.
I like the familial when they talk about this. Every family unit in this book is unorthodox. You have Ulysses with Peg's daughter. You have Colonel Cole with his daughter, where he's not married. He's
Right.
raising a daughter on his own. And you've got then Cress and Cole and Ulysses all living together as good friends. And then you've got Massimo who's in there, who's a good friend. So all this love in the story is really interesting because nothing is a nuclear family.
Well, they become a family.
Yes,
I mean, and
they absolutely
they end
do.
up going through the whole birth, life, death cycle with each other.
Yes.
And so that is, and it's interesting to see that evolve, and they basically come together at crisis moments and major celebrations, and they're still coming together at the very end of the novel. That is the family that they have built, and sort of redefines what it is to be family. The other relationships, and it's interesting because the novel covers a number of decades, and it's really the 1960s, which was a time of exploration, a time, it was a renaissance in America, and actually the whole world.
Yeah, absolutely.
With just the protests against the Vietnam War, the whole free love movement, the whole Jesus movement, which evolved out of that same time too. All of that parallels the opening up of the characters as they evolve and become freed, and not only in their thinking but also in their lifestyle, and freed from the emotional turmoil and things that have been oppressing them throughout their life.
Absolutely. This book, I think, the familial unit, the aspects of one of the things I think that the author wanted us to say is that a family is what you make of a family. I think that was one of the things in the book is that your family doesn't have to be a mother, a father, a child. You can, your familial unit can be your best friends. It doesn't have to be somebody who's blood relation to you.
2.5 kids and a dog.
Yes, exactly.
Okay.
Exactly. Question 6. Art, specifically the Renaissance art, is a major part of this novel. In what ways are these character lives, particularly Evelyn's and Ulysses, inspired by and shaped by art?
Okay, I'm going to read a passage from the book. Evelyn is an art historian and an art critic and an art restorer. And there are a lot of allusions and references to a number of songs, a number of pieces of literature, as well as art. And they tie together as far as developing the theme. And here is a discussion that Evelyn essentially is having with the reader. The world, she's talking about still life paintings, but the still lifes also show up as photographs, because at the very beginning they're taking pictures. There's even a line in here that says, click photograph, it's preserved forever. And the same thing is a piece of art. But she says this: the world of domestic kitchen is a female world. It is a world of routine, of body and of bodily function, a world of blood and carcass and guts and servitude. Men may enter, but they do not work there, and yet work is all that women do there. Occasionally in such paintings, male items appear on the table: pipes, watches, and maps, often in the most ludicrous composition, yet they succeed in what they intend to do: revoke the feminine space, male triumph over the triviality of the scene. The power of still life lies precisely in this triviality, because it is a world of reliability, of the mutuality between objects that are there and people who are not. Pause, time, and ghostly absence. Who was it who prepared the food? Who gutted the fish? Who scrubbed the kitchen? These are the actions that maintain life. Objects representing ordinary life reside in this space. Plates, bowls, jars, pictures, oyster knives. The shape of these objects has remained unchanged and has their function. But it's the people who aren't in the frame that she's concerned about, because that's where real life is. When you look at a still life, that's not a still life. There's nothing really living there. They're objects.
Many of these paintings were paintings of just like a bowl of fruit, or
right.
They were paintings of a kitchen scene, and things like that, where you're seeing all of these objects that she speaks about in a painting, but you're not seeing the person who picked the fruit,
right.
Who put the fruit on the table, who actually used that glass pitcher to make that lemonade, to create the scene to begin with. They're all the women outside of the picture. And it's interesting that male artists chose not to really depict women unless it was in a very amorous way. Right. It was never in respect to how much they do in daily life for the routine tasks that they perform.
And it's interesting because toward the end of the novel, there's this whole discussion of windows. And a window is like a picture frame. And Evelyn is looking out the window, and she describes a scene of all the activity and life that's outside. And to her, that's life, not this still life painting.
Right.
But real life involves people and love and all the actions that we have in showing respect to each other or loving one another.
I think that Evelyn in the book inspires you to want to look at art and go back and look at some of these pictures and these sculptures and things that she spoke about. Some of them were moving. I did go back and look at some of them, and some of them gave you. There was one that was done by a female artist who was that was actually of the Last Supper, and it was beautiful.
And she is unknown.
And she is unknown. Where we all know the
Leonardo da Vinci's.
Yes. Last Supper. Mm-hmm. I mean, it's common to everybody, but this other one I thought was much more intimate, and it was beautifully done. And it's something that nobody really respected because it was a woman of that time trying to do art.
I think that the art, the references to art, there's something going on that the author's weaving in there. And because I didn't have a background in it, I went and looked, and one of them was, I want to say the disposition of something, I can't remember the exact title, but I did look at that one, and it was a number of women carrying Jesus' body off the cross, and it was all women.
Yes.
And again, I think that's in there because there's a real feminist overtone to the novel.
Absolutely.
Because women have been left out of the algorithm for years.
Question 7. Ulysses is truly surprised by his inheritance of the
place in Florence.
In Florence, yep. And this fresh start at life includes leaving the only home he's ever known. What do you think he made? Why do you think he made that decision? And what would you have done if you were in his situation? Would you have done that adventurous?
Yeah, I want to answer this in a slightly different way, because what's interesting is as the novel progresses, Evelyn gets older. Ulysses and Evelyn have reconnected. She's old. She's significantly older than he is, and she's realizes she's going to come to the end of her life soon. She's in her early 90s, I think, toward the end of the novel. And so she bequeaths him her apartment.
Yes.
And so now he has another place. And the reason I'm pointing that out, because I couldn't figure out why would you name a character Ulysses, except Ulysses is part of an epic. And it's a
yes.
grand adventure where he travels across the world. Interestingly enough, Ulysses is a globe maker. That's the art that he produces. And so this whole idea that I think that the author's getting at is this is a universal theme and a universal concern. And they keep making references to songs when they got to the 60s. There's this whole list of songs that unfortunately I recognized all of them. But one of them that they could have put in there, love is what makes the world go round.
Yes.
What the world needs now is love, sweet love.
Yeah.
And that, I think, is again that one of the themes that the author is trying to plug in there.
Why do you think he made the decision he did? I think Ulysses made that decision because he does have adventure in him. I do think he has an adventurous soul. And I also think he was drawn to Florence. I think it was a time when it was very traumatic, but I also think we talked about Donnelly, and that happened in Florence. And so I think he was drawn back to that time and that place.
Well, he also left because there wasn't anything left for him in England because Peg had
moved on.
Yeah, she'd moved on. She'd gone on with somebody else. That was the love of his life. And there wasn't really anything holding him there. So he thought he'd give it a go.
From Peg's perspective, I can't believe she let him take her daughter. As a mother, I'm like, you just let him go take your daughter and raise her. And she pretty much did. She's like, here you go. You can have Alice. And he took her with him to Florence, which later Peg shows up. But it's conceivably quite a bit later when Peg shows up. And isn't really part of the raising of her at all.
No, but I think Peg also realized she knew she wasn't a good mother.
Yeah,
and so she thought it's better that you, Ulysses, you have a good heart. I want you to raise Alice. But what's interesting is when Peg shows up again, and it's very well portrayed that there's tension between Alice and Peg.
Absolutely.
They're not exactly sure. Alice wants to have a mom, wants to have a connection, but in a way doesn't. So she's conflicted. Peg is conflicted. But at one point in the novel, Alice has grown up to be a pretty good musician.
Right. And
she makes up songs with the help of Pete, who's the piano player. And one of the songs she wrote and created somehow infected Peg, or not infected is not the right word, but it was
impacted her,
and it was sort of a source of healing. And that song and the message in it sort of brought those two back together. At least, gave them a peace with one another.
Would I have done this in Ulysses' situation? I think absolutely. The concept of being in England or to be in Italy, I have to choose between the two. I'd rather be in Italy, so I would pick that just because I think that's amazing. But I also have, I think, a bit of an adventurous soul. So I think, plus you're going to some place where, it's kind of unknown to him. He didn't know what he was really walking into, but he went and he did it anyway. I don't know, would you have, it was hard because he left behind some really good friends.
I've never been to England and I've never been to Italy, but I have been to Mississippi, and that's a different country. Yeah, I'd leave to go to either one of them just for funsies.
Yeah, just to try it, right? Okay, our last question of the book, and this is probably Dean's favorite question. What do you think the significance is of the title? And the title is Still Life.
Right. Why don't you answer that first?
Okay, so to me, Still Life is, we talked about this in the novel, there's pictures, there's paintings, there's sculptures, and even in Ulysses' globes, when he made the globes, he would do them at a certain point in time. So the globe may not be the reflective of the globe right now. It may have been back in before Christ, or he would do those. So they were a set point in time as well. They were almost like a 3D picture of a still life in time. I think the significance of Still Life was that the little moments in life matter. Because this whole book is pretty much all little moments.
Well, right, so there are a lot of little vignettes. In fact, at the beginning, we talked about this yesterday. At the beginning, it was like we were waiting for something to happen.
Right.
And life is what happens when you're waiting for something to happen. I think John Lennon said life is what happens when you're making other plans. But that was one of the points, is the beauty of life is in every sort of, it's very similar to the play Our Town by Thornton Wilder.
Yes.
Thornton Wilder. And the idea that life is in the everyday, and that's okay.
And these still life shots, the photographs and things like that, you're stopping at a point in time and you're only seeing what's in the box. And I think it's like you said when you were reading those experts, life is really what's outside of the box.
Right.
It's really what's outside of that picture. You know, what else do you see?
Until she looked through the window, which is a box.
Yes.
And she saw the life, still life.
Yes.
She saw the actual life.
And I think this book, we're coming kind of to the end. You need to keep in mind that there's so much going on, but I think every person who reads it can take something out of it, something different, because there's a lot of themes, there's a lot of messages. It speaks to people in different ways. Even Peg, I felt, had redeeming qualities.
This is a novel. I did a higher ed gig for a number of years. This is a novel I would use in an introductory contemporary literature class. And so I would encourage you, if you do pick it up, gut it out.
Absolutely.
Gut it out.
Take the time to read. Take the time to read it, because I think you'll get something out of this book. I got something out of this book, and I really enjoyed the discussion, and I enjoyed talking about it with Dean, because I think you get more out of it when you discuss it with people. So if you're interested in discussing this book with us, or you want to hear more about the book, please join us. You can visit collierlibrary.org/events and sign up for the book club discussion that's going to happen on 6/27/23. Also, just so you know, we also have the summer reading program going on. So if you read this book, you can actually acknowledge that you've read the book with one of our great summer reading program certificates, and you can turn it in. Some of the adult prizes this year for summer reading include membership to the Botanical Gardens or family memberships to the zoo. So all you have to do is basically fill out a card, say you read Still Life or any other book that you choose in the library, or even not in the library, drop it off at the library, and you have a chance to win. So we would really encourage you to do that. And if you know any littles, please encourage them to be part of our summer reading program, because we have a great program for the kids as well.
And if you join us for Zoom, make sure you turn off your phone. Otherwise, my sister will call you in the middle of this Zoom.
Absolutely. It happens. Thank you guys so much. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you soon.
Okay, bye-bye.